Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, everyone. Just bring up the chat so I can see people chatting. If you're joining, I think at least via YouTube or Facebook, you can add comments and I will see them. Sorry, I'm just distracted by my dog. I'll try not to be. I'll try to focus a little bit. Today, I'm going to talk about ghosts, poltergeists, other spirits, hauntings, that sort of thing. Um, hey, good morning. As always, the first one here. Um, so I'm going to talk about ghosts, poltergeists, and other spirits. So spirits of the dead, things that go bump in the night, things that bug us. Of course, everything I talk about is through my own lens, which is predominantly shamanic. But I have significant significant paranormal experience. I don't even really like the words paranormal or supernatural, because it sort of denotes something that is not normal or something that is not natural. But sometimes these things can be so normal. um, I don't even call them paranormal or supernatural. Above natural. That seems weird to me. Well, here you are. Um, so welcome, welcome. And so I do, I'll see chat comments on YouTube and Facebook at least. I'm not sure about the other channels. This goes out over Twitter and Twitch and Instagram as well, but I think most people come in through YouTube or Facebook. But regardless, we'll get into it. We'll talk about, and I should say that this particular topic was at somebody's request. So somebody who's a regular um, viewer, tune in, or somebody who tunes in regularly, um, sent me a message over Facebook saying, "What's your take on poltergeists?" And we chatted a little bit, and said I think that would make a good video topic. I said sold, because coming up with topics every week, it's not incredibly hard, but I definitely want to talk about things that people are interested in. If it's just me picking, then it's something I'm interested in. But I want to, as long as I can talk about it. I'm not gonna, obviously, if somebody you know wants to talk about something that I have no knowledge of, I'm that's gonna be very hard. Although I am hopefully soon gonna start having guests on this. I can bring guests in, we can have a conversation, people can chat. So um, look for that. Look for that soon. Subscribe to the channel, hit the bell button. The bell button will alert you when I go live and when there's new videos and things like that. So don't forget to do that. So let's talk about, how shall I begin? And I'll try to weave in a couple of my own stories. There you go. Awesome. Sound baths are amazing. When I was doing some training, some people that I was training with, uh, they had trained with this Nepalese shaman who I've done some training with as well. Um, and they had this one of those singing bowls, right? You've probably seen those where you like encircle it, but you can also gong it. But they had one that was big enough to stand in. And so what you do is you set it out and you put some water, a little bit of water in the bottom of it, and some essential oils or something, and you stand in it, and they ring the bowl. And what an experience. Like, I could feel the vibration sort of like wrapping up my bones, going up my spine, and it's pretty amazing. It's a very special bowl. I have no idea. It must be, I would think, very expensive for a bowl that big. I carried it for the women who brought it. It was quite heavy and obviously large enough um, for me to stand in. I'm not a tall person, but I'm a broad person. I've got I tell people I'm built like a fire plug, like short and wide. So if I can stand in it, then it's a good size bowl. But interesting stuff. And today's topic was kind of your idea, so thank you for reaching out to me and bring up this topic. We're talking specifically about poltergeist, but I want to put that in a larger context of sort of like haunting. So, um, you know, in shamanism, we deal with all kinds of spirits, right? We deal with helping spirits, we deal with spirits that are being not so helpful, mischievous spirits, of which I seem to attract a lot. Um, so and it's funny, I've been on a number of shows, I've been on radio shows and, other avenues uh, discussing shamanism and things, but, I went on there's a radio show out of, like, Pittsburgh or something, and, it's a group of paranormal researchers, right? So these are ghost hunters. These are people who go out and try to find evidence of ghosts, and, um I related this story to them and they were like, "Oh my gosh, that's so scary." And I'm like, "How could this be scary to you? You're actually going out and looking for this activity." But I'll start with this story, and because I think it's a good lead into experiencing paranormal activity, which is why most people are interested in ghosts and in that that term and those types of spirits for a couple of reasons. One, people are interested in what happens to us when we die. That goes back forever. And two, people are having encounters with spirits and they're trying to make sense of it. So, I have a good friend, and she and her husband are, is this a word, devout atheists, right? They don't believe in supposedly don't believe in life after death, or anything uh paran- paranormal, there's that word again, or anything like that. And um I was with this friend and she was describing an experience that she had with a couple of ghosts. And she's had several experiences. Some of them were very frightening and stuck with her. And I was like, yeah, um, and she knew, she kind of knows what I do and that sort of thing. And she's like, I can't talk to my husband about this because he'll, think I'm crazy, or, whatever. But it's so common. And it's something like 50% of people in the US polled believe in ghosts. That's sort of a greater percentage than you get for almost anything, right? 50% doesn't seem like a lot, but not everybody has a lot of paranormal experiences. I was not necessarily a believer my whole life, but I had so many encounters, so many really weird encounters, that there are people like myself who are what I would consider weird attractors, people who um, these experiences seem to happen a lot to, and I'm one of them. And I discovered that from hanging out with other people, and stuff would happen around me that the other people would witness, and um they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so weird." I'm like, "Oh, that's weird to you? I thought that happened to everybody," kind of thing. But apparently it doesn't. So anyway, I'll tell this story. Um and this is the story that I told to these paranormal researchers on their radio show. Just a brief personal story. So, in the beginning of my or towards the beginning of my shamanic training, many moons ago, almost 10 years ago now, um, I signed up for a class with somebody who was not my main teacher. My main teacher I spent like 7 years with, but there was another teacher who came and was offering some individual courses and some things that I thought were important to my practice. So the first one was depossession, which we don't use the word exorcism. That's a very it comes from a specific religion. We use the term depossession And the way that we work with spirits is not in, hopefully, an antagonistic way. We work with them, we treat them as if they were clients. Now, one worldview of spirits is all spirits, unless they're angels from heaven, whatever, are evil and they're out to get you, whatever. That's one view, and that is not my experience. I can't argue with other people's experiences. Your experiences are as valid as mine, but that has not been my experience. Some spirits are just suffering. Some are mischievous because they find it funny or whatever their motivation is. Some don't want anything to do with people whatsoever and like keep to themselves unless you run into them. So there's all kinds of stuff going on. So anyway, I signed up for this class, but I had, gone through at least a year of training at that point, and um, paranormal activity really sparked up around me. And so this is something I'll touch on today as well. Um, there are certain types of spiritual development that you can do. Practicing shamanism is one of them that will kick up paranormal activity around you because the work that you're doing is changing how you show up in the spiritual world. You already show up in the spiritual world. You are a spirit. You have a body. Okay, you have a spirit, or you are a spirit, you have a soul, you have a body, you're not your body. We think of this as all that's real. And then some of us might have ideas about, oh, we have an aura, we have an energy body, we have a soul somewhere, we have a spirit somewhere. Um, Even as you're walking around in your body in this world, there's a spiritual component to this world that is underneath all of this, and you show up. When you start doing certain types of spiritual development, you light up, right? Your aura starts to glow. um, and sometimes spirits are really and if you have the ability to see and communicate with spirit, spirit knows that and will come to you. Certain spirits, some spirits still won't, don't want anything to do with you, but certain spirits will, like, oh my gosh. And I'll explain that when I talk more about ghosts. um so it's changing it's changing how you show up for sure. Um in my experience, people become brighter, or they light up, or they pulsate, or whatever. I don't know well, that's not exactly true. Um but I don't want to say I don't know how spirit I know how some spirits perceive people, but not every spirit out there perceives things the same way. um yeah, okay, yeah. That's a good way of looking at it. We're like food trucks that spirits can order from. We're also like before the days of the internet, if any of you can remember that. I can. I'm, in my 50s now. There was no internet growing up. There's really no internet even when I was in college. We had bulletin board services, and if you could like dial in with a modem and talk to somebody from another country or even another state or another city online, wow, that was amazing. Like, you would spend all, if you were me and you were nerdy, you would spend all night on those things, right? Talking about nothing, right? I had a good hamburger the other day. Where did and so social media, like, if you can remember days before social media, when you got on social media, like, oh my gosh, I can, for good or for bad, I can reach out to all of my friends from all over the world now and find out what they're doing and see what they had for lunch, and argue with them about politics. Um, so it's a little bit like that, right? So if you are um, so let's take ghosts for example. So when I speak of ghosts, I'm speaking particularly of deceased humans whose souls get stuck here. Um, and they get stuck for different types of reasons. And unless they unless they have a certain level of development themselves, it's very hard for them to interact with the living, because they're on another plane that touches. overlaps, interpenetrates the physical plane, but they don't have a body. They don't have a lot of energy necessarily to interact with people. So then all of a sudden somebody shows up that can see them, that can interact with them, and it's like, oh, So in the beginning of my training, a lot of paranormal activity happening around me, not just to me, to people around me. I was married at the time. My wife at the time said, please stop bringing people home with you when you're coming back from these trainings. And, we had people showing up at the foot of our bed when we were sleeping, and people walking up and down our hallway and what sounded like heavy boots. And my biggest complaint during that time, because that stuff didn't really scare me, was my stuff was disappearing. Important stuff was disappearing and then reappearing in weird places, and places that were physically impossible for them to be in. So I had a totem disappear from a totem, not like a carving of an animal, disappear from a shamanic training. I couldn't find it. People went back, searched the whole place, searched the driveway, searched the car I was in, and then like a week later, I got into another car that I hadn't been in the entire time. And there was something on the driver's side floor wrapped up in a piece of paper. And the car had been locked. Nobody had used it. I took it out. I unwrapped it. The paper had writing on it I had never seen. And inside that was my totem. Um, my laptop disappeared. The one I'm talking to you on now, or it could have been an older one. It must have been an older one. This one's much, that was so long ago. But a laptop, and disappeared. It was on my desk and it was gone. And I looked for it for like 3 days, and I couldn't afford a new laptop. And I was the only person in the house, and I went to go take a shower, and there was a table in the hall outside of the bathroom. And I remember, like, I set my towel down on it for a second, and I put my hand down on it, and I set my cell phone down. I grabbed the towel, and I went into the bathroom and took a shower. And when I came out, my laptop was sitting on that table exactly where I had placed my hand earlier. So um, I thought stuff was moving around in my house. And stuff did move, and people did see it moving. People other than me saw things moving. People other than me had things disappear. People had things break simultaneously. Like my former wife and my two daughters all had bracelets on, different bracelets that all broke at the same time. Broke and fell off at the same time. Three people. Um, so it was, lots of weird stuff. So I went to this training on depossession, and I talked to the teacher before the class, and I said, I'm really interested in having my stuff stop disappearing and reappearing. Like I don't mind if the ghosts want to hang out, but or whoever it is wants to hang out, but it's that part of it's kind of annoying. Like I need my laptop. I need some of the things that are, when things disappear, it's called deportation. When things appear, it's called apportation. So there's deportation and apportation going on. And apportation can be just like stuff appearing spiritually, but it means like a physical object showing up. So I've had that happen as well. So in my house, when I was the only one here for like a week, I walked out, and in the middle of my living room was a little, on the floor was a little Japanese charm. It was quite obvious. It was shiny metal. I picked it up, never seen it before, asked everyone who had been there the week earlier. Nobody belonged to nobody. Nobody had ever seen it. Still unidentified where it came from. But there was a lot of paranormal activity happening at that time. Um, oh, so this is an interesting one. Doing lots of spiritual development years ago, I noticed a black figure on numerous occasions. It never seemed to notice me. Do you think it's a spirit, poltergeist, or something else? So, this is what we call, or what many people refer to as a shadow person. And I don't have a fantastic explanation, but one explanation I've seen for this, which makes a lot of sense, is if you imagine we are three, our bodies are three-dimensional beings. We cast a two-dimensional shadow, right, on the ground. It's 2D, right? There's no thickness to it. It's 2D. So, um, one explanation I've seen is that these are four fourth dimensional beings. So these are beings that are existing in sort of dimensions that are parallel, a dimension that is perpendicular to the three dimensions, length, width, and height. I know some people count like time as the fourth dimension or something else, but I'm talking specifically physically. It's hard to imagine, but there are some explanations of it. You can find video of people doing these cool demos with 3D objects. So one explanation is they're higher dimensional beings, so spirits. Everything's a spirit, casting a shadow into three-dimensional space, right? And just as we don't necessarily perceive, like if you tried to look at the shadow from its edge, you can't because it has no dimension. You have to look at it from above or below, right? It only has two dimensions. So these shadow figures that people see that don't seem to interact or be conscious of, but seem to be three-dimensional. Some people say they're like echoes or shadows of these higher dimensional beings. That's one explanation. Um, that's Phoebe. She's crazy. Uh, I think she makes an appearance in just about every one of these I do, if not every single one. She's like, "Oh, you're on video. People are paying attention to you." She is a spirit who wants attention when people can see her. So that's a really good it's a really good high analog for some spirits that show up once we can start to see them. She's going to use me as furniture to get her cat condo is directly behind me. Oh, I don't know where she's going now. Um so I think shadow people may be spirits, but they may also, I mean, they everything is a spirit, but they may be higher dimensional beings that are projecting into 3D, um, and may not be able to perceive us. And some spirits can't perceive us because they're living on they're basically infinite planes of being, um, as far as I can tell, anyway. And some of them are very close to physical reality, and some of them are very far removed from physical reality. Some of them overlap and interpenetrate. They aren't all parallel, right? Some of them intersect, which is why we have. I saw a really interesting, watched something really interesting yesterday. It was on this man who he's a former detective and he investigates missing persons, and he's written about 4 or 5 books on missing persons, and he has noticed clusters of missing persons in different places in the US, particularly around national parks and monuments. And these are people that go missing. Sometimes, like, somebody's looking at them, they turn away and they look back and the person's gone and they never find a trace of them. And they can rule out things like animal attack. Of a lot of these cases, there are, people do sometimes fall down into a crevasse or get attacked by animals or whatever. But there was one that he was investigating where they were on hikers, and it was like this almost, it was in California, and was going up to this lake, and there was snow, so you couldn't run in any direction. And so he went forward from the rest of the hikers, and 20 minutes later they looked around, nothing. They never found. He had metal spikes on. They never found him. They did search and rescue the entire mountain. Have never found him. Never found a trace of him. Disappeared into what they think is thin air. So this guy, who's a former detective and very much ensconced in the 3D world, is like, I think we have to look at other explanations. And so they did some measurements, and they went one place that people have disappeared from is Mesa Verde, and I think that's in Colorado. I've been there when I was a kid. Which is all of these places, these people disappear from the Native Americans in the area treat them as sacred spots and almost taboo. Like there are certain places they don't go because that's where the spirits live, or that's where the spirits come out of the mountain. And a lot of these places have large deposits of quartz, which is a piezoelectrically active crystal. When it's compressed, it releases electrical energy. And people use quartz crystal for spiritual healing and stuff. So they took measurements. They went to Mesa Verde, and using laser equipment, they actually found time distortion. So, and a big one, like 0.6%. So from one place to another, time is actually moving at a different pace. And they found massive spikes of electromagnetic force in the area. And then they talked to a physicist, and he goes, yeah, he goes, theoretically, that could, those kinds of things, this are what we would expect to see if there were a portal. And we might think of a portal as like a supernatural explanation for something. But physics has thought that, black holes and white holes and all these things might open portals, from one place in the universe to another, or between planes in the universe. So his working theory, at least in this documentary, was these people may have the portals may have opened up, and these people may have incidentally walked into them and wound up somewhere else in the universe, or on another plane of existence. And there are lots of places where people know about these things. Sedona, Arizona is full of these places, vortexes they call them there. And so Native Americans have, petroglyphs of the portals, and people coming out of them and people going into them, and different tribes all over, all kinds of tribes that have petroglyphs, and tribes that don't exist anymore. So, um, there may be someday a scientific explanation for these things. It's not just what we might consider paranormal. So anyway, back to my story. All this paranormal activity happening to me. I talked to this teacher and I go, look, my stuff's disappearing, and I really would, like to come to some kind of agreement where that stops. Because that's trouble for me. I work, I need my laptop to work. I need, I don't want my kids. My daughter's shoes disappeared in the car. She kicked her shoes off and they were gone. Never found them, never came back. The car door had never been opened. We tore the car apart. Her shoes were gone. And we were going to a restaurant. So we had to go buy her another pair of shoes to go to the restaurant, because you can't, go in a restaurant with bare feet. So all kinds of stuff were happening. So this teacher, she's like, well, I don't think that's really happening. I believe that you're perceiving these things, but I don't think it's a spiritual thing. I think somebody in your house is moving stuff around and not telling you, or whatever, because it requires a significant amount of energy for spirit to move things, or make them disappear or reappear. And that's kind of true, in my experience. However, there are some people, apparently myself, some members of my family, that are large sources of energy that spirit can draw upon to cause physical change. Um, and psychokinetic effects have been measured scientifically, at least on a micro level and sometimes on a macro level. So I was like, okay, well, this teacher's not going to believe me, but I know I kind of know what's happening. So we're working, we're sitting in a circle. We're sitting in a small circle. The teacher is demonstrating stuff, and everybody has their things that they brought with them to the class behind them. My stuff was about 10 feet behind me, included. When you train shamanism, you got a lot of stuff. You got to bring a lot of stuff with you. So I had my drum and drumstick, my rattle, notebook, like all kinds of stuff, water bottle, whatever, behind me. So we're sitting in a tight circle, and the teacher's doing a demo, and my rattle starts to shake on its own, shaking, and you can hear it. You can see it move, and you can hear it. And the woman next to me turns to me, her eyes are about this big, and goes, "What the bleep is that?" I looked at her and I go, "Yeah, it's just my rattle. Don't worry about it." Uh, So, good morning. Great morning to you as well. Um, like amplifiers. Well, sort of. Yeah, I mean that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is they're like generators, right? So they generate a lot of energy that spirit can use, spirit can draw upon and use. So, um, that's really good. Apologies, just um I got to respond to a text. We are getting some weather um, up here, so lots of things are canceled. My kids' school is canceled for today and stuff. So apologies if I get distracted by some text messages. Just trying to figure things out. So more like generators that spirit can use the energy to enact things. Some people do amplify spiritual energy um for their own use. It's often what we're trying to do, right? When people who are doing practicing shamanism or doing energy healing or, um, I guess in a way, like what amplifiers do, right? Like a speaker is that they take a signal and then they add energy to it. So I guess, that makes sense. Um, it's probably not an absolutely perfect analogy for this, but yeah, for sure. So there are people who do this. So anyway, my rattle shakes. Everybody in the room, there's about 20 people in the class with the teacher, and everybody hears and sees this going on. And then at the next break, the teacher comes up to me and said, "Okay, I believe you. I know, I know what's going on here. I see what's happening." And all kinds of stuff happened. Um, and some of the more annoying things that happened were, like I kept having weird stuff happen with my car. Like my a transmission that was fairly new went. I had to get a new transmission put in. My phone stopped working all of a sudden, and I needed the GPS to get to where I was going. The I was in the car. It was it was like a Suzu Rodeo, an old one, and the radio dial changed itself to wasn't like there was an electronic seek button on it. The dial actually kept detuning itself while I was driving to this training. So spirits were trying to communicate, and they found different ways. They found different ways. There was one main culprit, and we came to an agreement. But there were other spirits involved as well, and there's a lot of spiritual activity around my family. So um, had an incident on Easter just like a year ago. Yeah, it would have been last Easter, walking through a cemetery. Um, and and then there's a place that I go in my town. There's a hiking trail behind. You walk through a cemetery, an old cemetery, um, to get to these hiking trails. But there's a lot of activity. There's not a tremendous amount of activity in the cemetery, and sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. People think of cemeteries as spooky places because that's where dead bodies are buried. There's not always a lot of spiritual activity in and around a cemetery in my experience. There can be. There's certain cemeteries where there's a lot of stuff that's happened where people might have conducted rituals there, or there were mass casualties. Like I went to a cemetery in Savannah, Georgia, where a lot of people had died from an epidemic, I think of Spanish flu. um, and I got really it really affected me and my family physically when we went into the cemetery, and we all had to leave. So um uh yeah, so it was basically a sit down. So one of the things in the way that I was trained is that we don't cast spirits out, and we don't treat them as um enemies or go to war with them if we can help it. Particularly ghosts are stuck spirits. They're suffering because they're not where they're supposed to be. Um they should be having a beautiful afterlife somewhere, but for some reason they got stuck. And the way that ghosts get stuck usually is because they die. They're surprised that they die. So usually it's the result of something like an accident or violence, a natural disaster, or a sudden death due to illness. Can be the case. People who are ill for a long time, or people who kind of die of old age, don't tend to be stuck spirits because at some level they're preparing to cross over. Um, it happens from time to time. I worked with somebody whose father was stuck. He died in the hospital, and they told him he was dying, but he didn't accept it, and he thought, like, he checked himself out of the hospital, which was, he wound up being taken back and almost immediately by an ambulance, and he thought he was getting out and was gonna do all these things and whatever, and we're like, "You've got multiple organ failure," he was very, very, very sick, and, um, so he got stuck in the hospital, and that's usually what will happen with spirits, with ghosts in particular. They'll get stuck in a location where they die because they're confused and they don't know where to go. I've seen this a lot with accidents, with natural disasters, with battlefields. I did a land clearing on a space where had been a battle. That was interesting. Um, and I don't recommend, like, if you are just venturing into the world of working with spirit, doing what we call psychopomp work, which is helping spirits cross over to where they should be, I don't recommend doing any kind of mass casualty kind of situation, unless you have help. I've done mass casualty events, but I've done them with groups of people. Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so I have helping spirits, as do we all, but I have helping spirits that I work with, for what we call death and dying work, and that includes psychopomp work. Psychopomp is comes from the Greek. Um, psyche means spirit, and pomp means guide. So you have pomp and circumstances, or whatever. Um, so he means guide of the spirits. So that when we do that work, we're guiding the spirits. So it what I experience when I do psychopomp work varies by depending upon the person, and what their beliefs are about what happens to them when they die. So your beliefs and expectations shape your afterlife. Um, the afterlife is we call like an astral construct, which is constructed out of consciousness, and so it can be shaped. And so if you expect to go to hell, not the Christian hell, in my experience, doesn't exist. And I've worked on spirits who were murderers, who had murdered multiple people, and they crossed over just fine. The thing that was holding them back was they were afraid that they were going to go to hell for punishment. There's no punishment in the afterlife unless you make it, right? You could make it. You could make punishment if you felt like you wanted to experience that. But the afterlife is very flexible, and you can experience whatever you want to experience there. So some people get lifted up, some people go through a portal, some people go in a specific direction. Some cultures going west is, towards the setting sun is the direction that they go in. So what I experience depends on the person. Um, when I'm journeying. So when I teach people this work, you know, I I ask them to be open to what the experience might be like, because there's all kinds of stuff. And sometimes a portal opens up and deceased loved ones come through to help the person across. That has happened as well. Um, so yeah, all kinds of things can happen there. Sometimes they walk, and sometimes they're lifted up, and sometimes they teleport or fly off, or all kinds of things happen in my experience. And I just allow it, facilitate it, ask my helping spirits to do the work. It's one of the things I love about shamanism. I'm incredibly lazy. I mean, I'm not really, but all of the work is done by helping spirits. I don't do much. I don't do much. The work what I do, my role in the work is essential. It's critical. You couldn't take me out of the equation. But it is like it does make me tired if I do a number of sessions in a day and have a couple students and whatever. It is tiring work. But not it's not like, physically tiring or mentally straining. It just leaves me drained. Um, which is fine. Over time you learn to manage your energy really well. My teacher, my main teacher, she's retired from teaching, but for a while, she was the busiest human being I knew. She was seeing like 5 clients a day, teaching and organizing multiple classes, and her classes are, um, like, s some of them are residential, so, like, arranging, like, basically places for people to stay, like not in a hotel, but like retreat centers and stuff like that. Like doing all of those arrangements and then teaching the classes. And she had an assistant, but I don't think somebody could do that work without an assistant. Um, and I met her when she was in her early 70s. So, you know, power. That's power. To be able to do that. And she was seeing people in person, in her office. I did that for a little while, and then the pandemic came, and they were making me pay rent for an office that couldn't bring clients into. So I said, I'm going to do remote from now on. And I've done that since the beginning, since 2019. I've done only remote work, but I may teach classes live again in person. We'll see. My dream someday is to have a retreat center, but also to take people on really cool retreats to cool locations, cool spiritual locations. Like, let's go visit the holy wells of Ireland and then get together and do some shamanic work, or let's go to the someplace in Bali and do that work, and that'd be hopefully amazing stuff. So thank you all for joining this morning. It's so good to see everybody here, and uh, love the comments, love that. So anyway, I told that story about and I thought it was funny about, like, having all of this spiritual activity happen, the teacher not believing me, and then having it happen in front of her. And that's sort of my gold standard for, because the human mind plays lots of tricks, right? There's an effect called pareidolia. I can't pronounce it well. Pareidolia, I think. And that is, oh yeah, safe travels to you and the kids. Oh, you're just joining now. Sorry. My brain is on my kid's not going to my kid's not going to school this morning because their school is canceled due to weather. Which hasn't even started snowing yet, but I think we're gonna get it soon. They also don't want like kids leaving at the end of school, and the kids leave at different times. Like my daughters are seniors, so they can actually leave. They have privileges because they have good grades and that sort of thing, so they can leave during study halls and stuff. Um, which I never got to do when I was in school. You were in school from 7 to 2:30. No, excuse me. Pardon me. You were in school no matter what. You couldn't leave. You couldn't leave the building, let alone leave the campus. and then my daughters can like go off and have lunch. They have to come back, obviously for their classes. And if they have unexcused absences in their classes, their privileges are taken away. I think it's a cool thing because we're trying to train kids to be adults and be responsible for themselves and stuff. Oh, thank you. um, yeah, I'm not sick or anything. I think it's either allergies or it's spirits trying to communicate with me. Sometimes I get physical symptoms. Strange stuff happens. By the way, I'm drinking this has been my coffee for a while and I really like it. New England Coffee Roasters Nantucket blend. I actually used to live near the New England I believe I lived near the New England Coffee Roasters plant. I could smell I lived in Massachusetts and I lived between a coffee roaster. I was a few miles off, but you could smell coffee roasting on a large scale and a peanut butter factory. And it would smell like breakfast really often. The peanut butter factory didn't smell like peanuts. It smelled like almost like burnt waffles, which is really odd. Um, but thank you. And thank you all for joining this morning. I love it. I love to see we're getting, a few more people every time I do one of these things. So I do love that. Um, I love talking with you all. And this is how I essentially teach for free. I have a lot of people who contact me who ask, they're, understand people are in a money crunch or go through financially hard times and stuff. And like, I want to learn with you, but I can't afford to pay you, or I want, a session, and I can't afford to pay. And I always feel a little bad about it, but I can't. Like, this is, you know, I have a mortgage and I have two kids about to enter college and um healthcare, and I like to eat. I need to pay for my coffee, and I like to eat a couple times a day. So I can't. I could literally spend all day, every day, um, teaching people for free and doing free healings and all kinds of stuff. And it's never worked out. It's never worked out for me. I did. I used to see people on a sliding scale, even, and that didn't work out. For some reason, the lack of exchange there, and I'd have people who I would say, okay, I'll see you on a sliding scale, or I'll give you a free session or something like that. When I was first starting out, and I would chunk off 2 hours in my calendar and they wouldn't show up, or they would show up late, or they wouldn't take it seriously, or they would get angry with me when I would say, like, I can't keep doing this. And they're like, oh, you're all about the money. And, they would get really personal with me sometimes. So I just cut it off and said, I can't really do that anymore. Um, so this is how YouTube, Facebook, I write, I have a podcast I haven't done in a long time, but I have all kinds of things out there that I've done, and I figure like I can come on here and talk to 100 people, instead of sort of one on one, and that is much more effective. And yes, I'm not going to come on here and um, teach people how to journey. If you want to learn to do that, there are ways to do that. Besides learning from me, there are lots of ways to do that. Um, but I wouldn't do it in a mass setting without like I would do it over Zoom. I've done it over Zoom. I did a class over Zoom during my teacher training. I did teacher training during the pandemic, and part of teacher training is you have to put a class together. And so I've done that. I did a whole class over Zoom. It's challenging, right? As opposed to sitting in a circle, but I would do it again. All right, so back to it. So when it comes to ghosts, I'm always been unsure how a soul would become a ghost. Would this be a choice made after death, or part of what you set up coming in? Oh, no, that's a really good question. I haven't gone too much into this. So, um, one of the terms that I use for ghost, and let me just say that ghosts are only one kind of spirit. There are, I don't know. how many kinds of spirits out there, right? I mean, think of all the terms we have for supernatural beings, right? From ghost and poltergeist and um, you know, uh, uh, all the mythological beings, the Fae, elves, Contomble, Menahune. I have a list somewhere of like 200 different names for, um, spiritual, what some people refer to as little people, but they're not always little. They can be very large, as a matter of fact. Um, Tribal spirits, interdimensional, like there's all kinds of spirits out there. But ghosts, we're talking about deceased people. Another way to describe that is a stuck spirit. How does a human soul become stuck? Um, Usually, that person has died and the death has come as a shock or a surprise. And so the soul like jumps out of the body and gets stuck, is confused, and refuses to cross over when the opportunity arises because its soul is confused and frightened. When I do psychopomp work, and I teach when I teach psychopomp work one on one, when I do that kind of work, I will find a stuck spirit for my student to help cross over as part of the training. And 100% of the time, 100% of my students who I've done that work with, they're like, "Oh yeah, I went and the spirit was really confused." Right? So confusion, anger, shock, surprise are usually the ways that spirits get stuck. So the second part of that is it a choice that's made after death? Not in my not in my experience, but anything's possible. Um, and you know, I think there are people who may have a certain type of spiritual development or whatever that decide before they die they're going to come back to cause harm. There's a really good story, a really spooky story. This comes from the Salem witch trials, or the Salem witch craze that happened, and I could do a whole talk about that. Um, in the late 1600s in Salem, Massachusetts. Most people are somewhat familiar. It's pretty famous. Lots of movies made about it and stuff like that. So there was a guy, there was a farmer named Giles Corey, and he was accused by somebody of witchcraft. And he was not a very nice guy. And most of the people, I mean, none of the people that we know of were actually performing anything that we would consider witchcraft. Everybody was, and it became like the witch trials became like, oh, we really want to steal this person's land, or that person looked at me the wrong way in church last Sunday, so I'm going to get back at them. Um, but there was this guy, Giles Corey, and there were some weird things about the way the courts worked then, in that um, for them to take your land, I think you had to confess to the crime or something along those lines, right? It was really, really important for them to get a confession out of these, out of these people. So there was this guy, Giles Corey, and I've been to the site of his death. And his burial, they think, they don't know exactly where his grave is, but is most likely under a church parking lot in Salem, Massachusetts. Be interesting to do like ground penetrating radar search or something. But with there's a building where the sheriff. So there was a sheriff of Salem, Mass back then. So Giles Corey was accused of witchcraft, hauled in. He was an old guy. He was in his 60s back then. That was pretty old. He was in his 60s, and he refused to confess. And he was sort of like, "Screw you," kind of thing. I'm sure he didn't say that, but so the sheriff went out back of the jail. So we know where this is. I've stood on the site of where it happened, dug a shallow pit, put Giles Corey in the pit, put a board on top of him, and started stacking rocks on it. So he was lying in this pit with a board over him and started placing more and more weight on him. And this was, death by pressing, essentially. And so he um, he eventually died. His last words, according to records by the sheriff, he said, "Do you want to confess?" And he asked for more weight to be put on. In other words, like, get this over with, just kill me. But it's also recorded that he cursed the sheriff, but not just the sheriff. He cursed the office of sheriff. And so there was an office of sheriff in Salem, Mass, for a you know several hundred years. Every single sheriff, until there was no longer a sheriff in Salem, this is recorded, died of mysterious circumstances, or got so ill by some rare disease that they were forced to quit. People had, like, a 35-year-old sheriff died of a heart attack while sitting behind the desk. This happened over and over again, dozens of people for several hundred years, until they stopped having an office of sheriff. So Giles Corey either had been practicing some form of magic where he was able to curse people, in my opinion, or he was able to, at the moment of his death, he was so, like, ticked off and refused to cross over, and even asked for more weight to be placed upon him so he could finally die. And by the way, it is a very painful, miserable, long death, as one might imagine. But I've seen research on this where they actually took somebody who's in, like, really great shape and, like, an athlete, and stacked weight on them, and they were like, saw, like, the lactic acid in their system built up, and they had to stop the experiment after a very short period of time. I think Giles Corey lasted for something like 3 days. Um, so anyway, he may have been able to hold on, and essentially cause havoc on people who held the office of sheriff. I don't know the truth behind it. I haven't investigated it much, but oh, yeah, like a documentary. Yeah. So yeah, definitely check it out. I've spent a fair amount of time in Salem. I used to live not that far from there, and would go a lot. And I went, was it last year, 2 years ago? 2 years ago was my last trip to Salem. And it was a lot of fun. And we did one of those late night ghost tours where you walk around the city and they talk about various um, haunted spots. There's a lot going on in Salem. And the cool thing about Salem, it is very touristy, but it has become, you know, witches have taken over, like real witches, like people really practicing witchcraft who are not evil beings. They're just practicing um, a nature-based religion that is much, much older than Christianity or anything else. Wicca is a new religion, but witchcraft itself, what we term witchcraft, um, is basically folk magic that has existed in every culture for tens of thousands of years. It goes hand in hand with shamanism pretty well, actually. Yeah, so check out Giles Corey, crotchety old guy, crusty old guy. Uh, I believe, testified against his wife to get his wife convicted of witchcraft. I think she was hung, actually, if I remember correctly. Um, but he didn't want his land being taken away, and he wanted to, like, you know, once you're arrested. Although an ancestor of mine actually was arrested for witchcraft during that time, and actually did not die. There were lots of people arrested. I forget how many people actually died in Salem. There were people who died in other places, but the majority of the people who died were in Salem, in the U.S. In Europe, during the witch hunts there, it's estimated as many as 4 million people were killed. And again, it was the same thing. It was religious paranoia combined with people trying to steal property, or steal business. So I realize this is going down a little bit of a rat hole, but uh, back in the day, in medieval ages and whatnot, um, beer and ale were brewed by women primarily, and the women would go out and sell the beer. They were called alewives. It's where we get that term for the fish was named after it. I have a very good friend who is a beer meister, beer brew mistress, whatever. She works for a craft brewery and is, I guess, well regarded as somebody. And her alewife is her license plate. Anyway, um, they were called alewives, and to advertise their stuff, they used to wear these pointy hats. So they'd walk around with these pointy hats, and people could see them from a distance and say, "Oh, I can go buy beer from that person." Well, and this is where we get pointy hats on witches from, by the way. Well, around, I don't know what century it was, um, monasteries decided they needed to make some money. They needed to have, because they weren't farming for themselves, and or they might have had a small subsistence farm, but they needed to upkeep their buildings. They needed to buy books and paper, and it was expensive, and Bibles and robes and whatever. They decided to start to brew beer. This is why we have a lot of beer that comes out of, that originated European beer that originated in monasteries. Well, the monasteries didn't want to compete with these alewives, and so they accused them of witchcraft, stirring the cauldron, pointy hat stirring the cauldron. Sound familiar? These were women brewing beer, and they were burned at the stake, so that monasteries could make more money. One might ask, um, one might ask who the evil ones were here. People practicing, and it's not to say that these alewives were necessarily practicing any sort of ritual work or natural magic or anything like that. They were just brewing beer. There might have been, some overlap, but um, there's a saying like, you know, I've seen this as a meme out there, like, beware the ones who taught us to fear the witches and not the ones who were burning the witches at the stake, right? Like, anyway, I've gone down a a long path. Briefly, because I'm almost at the end of my time. It's started snowing out here. It's really pretty. It's one of those snows with like really large snowflakes, but coming down pretty hard. So they're large snowflakes, but they're probably very wet, if I had to guess. If you don't live in an area where you get a lot of snow, one thing you know is that there are all different. There are different kinds of snows. That's why they say in like Inuit language, there are, 36 different words for snow, different qualities of snow. And it's important to know different qualities of snow. And so in Maine, where I live, we have different terminologies for the kind of the amount and quality of snow. So if we say it's just spitting, that means it's like a flurry. It's just a little bit coming down. If we say a dusting, or in Maine, they'll say a dustin. A dustin is just a slight covering of snow, like when you get like half an inch or something, just a dustin. Or we'll joke if you get like a foot of snow, they'll go, "Oh, just a dustin," to be sarcastic. So, um, I want to talk, since it's in the topic here. I'm going to talk a little bit about poltergeist and the idea of poltergeist. The word poltergeist comes from German, as you might guess, and it means noisy spirit. And oftentimes, a poltergeist activity, you've got stuff moving around, stuff banging, steps, whatever. Um, and so, because there was an visible force um, creating this, very often poltergeists were associated with ghosts. Um, my understanding is that the majority of time this is not the case. The majority of the time, poltergeist activity is not the result of a stuck spirit in a place. And I'll say that spirits can get stuck. Um, Spirits can be stuck in a place, and they can also get stuck to a person, potentially, potentially a moving object like a ship, maybe not a car, unless you read what's the book Christine, the Stephen King book. I think that was his first. I think that was his first book, Christine, or the first one he published anyway. Um, Stephen King's from Maine. Um, his house is really cool, very creepy. He's got like wrought iron fences with bats on them and stuff. But I guess he's converting it to like a writer's center or something. I don't know how much time he actually spends here in Maine anymore. He's got, he's a very wealthy man. Um, he's got big houses in Florida and I'm sure other places. But anyway, so poltergeists, noisy spirits, right? Um, a lot of the time, what happens with poltergeist activity is they will find somebody investigating this, they'll find in the home. Um, oh, interesting. I will check that out. Um, Great Amherst Machine, Esther Cox story. I will definitely take a look at that. Thank you for letting me know about that. One of these days, I've got to visit Nova Scotia one of these days, and I've never been. We used to have a catamaran here that could get you there in a few hours, but there's a ferry, so from Portland, but I think it's like overnight or something. So I need to plan a trip to Nova Scotia at some point. I'm excited about that. Um, so um, So a lot of times when they're investigating poltergeist, they will find an angst-ridden teenager in the house. Ah, good afternoon. I'm assuming you're not where I am since it's morning where I am. So, whereabouts and good afternoon to you. Whereabouts are you tuning in from? I would be interested to find out. Um, so a lot of times with poltergeist activity, they find like an angsty teenager or somebody who's really unhappy in the house. The explanation for that amongst sort of parapsychologists and stuff is that there's an aspect of this person that has psychokinetic abilities and that is acting up in moments of intense emotion. Intense emotion can trigger all kinds of things, right? Yes, for sure. Someone angsty involved. Um, yeah, and normally, a lot of times there's a teenager involved, and we've our between my partner and our oldest is now 20, but we had at one point five teenagers around, so I get it. There's a lot of hormonal activity happening. um, People are going through like teenage life. We don't give teenagers enough credit for keeping it together. Like, your life's easy. You just go to school and blah, blah, blah. But, we forget like we've got raging hormones during that time. We are under tremendous amount of social pressure to conform. Like our daily existence is, we're surrounded by people who love us, people who hate us, and people who are indifferent to us. And we want approval from everybody, but we also want our autonomy, right? Teenage times are angsty for a reason. I remember running into, when I was an adult, running into my eighth grade science teacher, who I loved, Mr. Walker. He's, rest in peace, Mr. Walker. He was a lovely man, very caring, loved the kids. And he's like, "How you doing?" I'm like, "I'm doing great." Forget what I was doing at that age. I was in my 20s. And he goes, "You were one pissed off kid." Like, yeah. Good morning to you. I'd love to hear where I know we've got somebody from Nova Scotia, we've got somebody from Florida. Love to hear where people are tuning in from. And I'll say that I apologize. I'm just about to wrap up. I usually do these for about an hour, and I've been talking for an hour and 10 minutes. So yeah, in most poltergeist cases, in my understanding, and I'm not a paranormal investigator. I've just had experiences. Um, there's a person in the house, and they're not doing it consciously. It's coming, like, it's, imagine like having this burst of angry energy that like shoots out of you, and something falls off the wall, or something breaks, or there's pounding, or there's um people are people are psychokinetic, whether you are conscious of it or not. You're causing, your thoughts cause changes in reality. That's just the way it is. Now, can I pull a reverse Isaac Newton and make this apple levitate? Not at this point in my career. I don't have that much conscious control over it. Most of our psychokinetic stuff is unconscious. Oh, good, good. Oh, from the EU. Welcome, welcome. Durango, Colorado. Welcome, welcome. And Michigan. So people from all over. Um, so thank you all for joining from your various. Yes. Yeah. So, yeah, this is true. This is true on a scientific and spiritual level. Nothing you observe is unaffected by your observation. And if you're really curious about that, if you want your mind bent a little bit, look up the double slit experiment. The double slit experiment, where they pass light through two slits, and when they're looking at it as light waves, they'll see an interference pattern from the waves passing through. When they place particle detectors in front of those slits, they'll see particles show up on the other side. How does the light know whether to behave as a particle or as a pattern of waves? Consciousness. It's the only explanation, which is why a lot of quantum physics, for example, uh, when people get really deep into the nature of reality, their descriptions start to become more spiritual, and the observer effect is well documented, well scientifically studied, not explained well, because we can't explain consciousness, but yeah, it's mind bendy. How do these, and they've even been able to do stuff where they were able to prove that the causality is not linear in time. Like, they can cause effects from something that already happened, right? Um, Again, it's mind bendy stuff. Yeah, the light is conscious. Everything is conscious, right? Spirit, everything is a spirit. Some things that are spirits also have physical representation. Do you think somebody's Kundalini energy shot out through climax could cause some ruckus, like things falling off the wall that have never been unstable? Um, this sounds like there's a personal story behind this, but I absolutely think that that's possible. Yeah. Climax orgasm is a huge energetic event. Um, it is, depending on how there's not just one type. Um, Depending on how you do it, like, there can be, if you practice Tantra, for example, you can use sexual excitation, stimulation, and climax as a way to channel huge, huge amounts of energy. People who practice sex magic, for example, are doing basically magical rituals that are pouring sexual energy into that, which is, Kundalini is sexual energy. People will say, "Oh, it's not necessarily." No, it is, absolutely. It sits at the base of the spine. It is psycho, spiritual, physical energy. and it is incredibly powerful stuff. So I absolutely think that that's possible. Um, yeah, so you got to be careful. Don't break anything important. Yeah, for sure, for sure. And people who practice sex magic. We can talk about sex here. I've done lots of talks about sex and magic and sex and spirituality here. But I have to be careful about being too graphic and not violating anybody's terms of service. But um, people will tell you that adding sex to magic, and magic, like, doesn't have to be ceremonial magic. It could be any form of magic you can think of, chaos magic, witchcraft, folk magic, all kinds of stuff. Adding sexual energy to that supercharges it. Um, there's a reason. So in French, a term for the climax or orgasm is le petit mort, the little death, right? Because it's like having an out of body experience. There can be really dissociative climax, or can be really climax where you're really in your body. You can shape your experience, and it takes exploration with an open heart and an open mind to get into this. And you have to set aside our culturally enforced beliefs regarding shame around sex, that sex can't be spiritual. Sex is spiritual. Money is spiritual. Anybody tells you something isn't spiritual is flat out wrong. Everything is spiritual. We just might not be conscious of it. Um, if sex wasn't spiritual, religions would not be trying to control it. They wouldn't care. Um, So yeah, it sounds like you had an experience of some psychokinesis related to sexual climax, and I mean, it's cool. It's a cool effect. People who practice tantra, in the West, a lot of tantra is really, really focused on sex and getting off. We have a lot of we have a very thirsty culture. We'll put it that, to use a mod term, very thirsty culture where um, uh, we're still coming out of, at least where I live, most people came over during the Elizabethan days, but there were Puritans, or not most people, but my ancestors came over here during the Puritan days. So we had that phase of, sex is from the devil. And then we went through the Victorian era where everything was buttoned up and 16 layers of clothing, and um, you know, it's funny. Um, so we have this culturally informed pressure around sex, and that sex can't be spiritual. Sex is incredibly spiritual. Um, there's almost nothing. There's almost nothing. We slap the label spiritual on something. Um, my definition of spiritual is that which gives us an experience of being connected to what is greater than ourselves. So meditation can do that. Shamanic journeying can do that. Walking in nature can do that. Sex can absolutely do that. Eating can do that if you do it right. I'm a big fan of conscious eating, but I'm a big fan of consciously eating really amazing food. There's something to be said for really simple food as well. I can eat this apple, and you know I can use mindful eating and eat this apple and have an unbelievably spiritual experience from that. When you train yourself to do that, every activity becomes spiritual, including sex. Um, so not, I mean, eh, unpartnered sex or masturbation, same thing. Um, whatever your thing is. I'm a very sex positive spiritual teacher. And I think people people can use sex to heal themselves. They can use it for manifestation. They can use it to gain access to higher levels of consciousness. So it can become a very amazingly powerful thing. When we use sex to control other people, that's the same thing as using religion to control other people or money to control other people. Like it weakens the spiritual connection to that. But everything we do is spiritual. I like to say that the 3D physical world is the spiritual world in disguise, right? My view, my shamanic view, is that everything is a spirit, and there are an infinite number of spiritual planes of existence out there, um, and maybe an infinite number of physical planes, but I only know one of them. Um, but this is an overlay. This physical world that we live in is an overlay of the spiritual world, and so the core of us is pure spirit, and all of that spirit is swimming around in the same infinite ocean of consciousness, and that's what we are. So imagine yourself, your consciousness. You take an eyedropper and you take a drop of water out of the ocean, and that's your consciousness, right? It's we're taking the drop route. That's our ego that says we're separate from the ocean. But when we drop our consciousness back into the ocean of pure consciousness, there's no more separation, right? There's no, we are the ocean at that point. We become less differentiated. Now, while we're here, we incarnate into this body for a reason. We incarnate to have certain experiences, to go through certain healings, to get certain learnings. Why do we do that? Because this pure ocean of consciousness, it's hard for it to observe itself without creating the illusion of separation. Yeah, absolutely. Everything is energy with different density. Yeah, and different density, different frequency. Um, but everything is energy, and physics and spirituality are in perfect alignment there. This apple is 100% energy. There's nothing here that you see that is not energy. Even your view of this apple, and you're just seeing, light coming out of your screen, that's energy. But like the weight that I feel of this apple is 99 point with point nine with seven nines behind that empty space. Looks pretty solid, feels pretty solid. Um, it's empty space and some vibrating energy patterns. That's it. That's all everything is. Everything in this physical world is just that. And so we can bring spiritual energy into the physical, we can bring physical energy into the spiritual energy. So I'm going a little bit off the topic here, but so the Emerald Tablet, the of Hermes Trismegistus, that's been around for thousands of years in many different translations. Um, and one of the aphorisms from that is, I forget what they call them, rubrics. One of the rubrics or theses, or sayings is, that which is above is like that which is below, or as above, so below, right? And what my interpretation of that is that the spiritual world and the physical world follow very similar principles, right? And that they're very, again, the physical world is a spiritual overlay. And so we know that there is a law in, the law of conservation of energy, that energy cannot be destroyed or created. Everything that exists. It cannot be created, but it can be transformed from one form to another, right? So energy can be moved around. So if I hold this apple up in my hand, it has potential energy. But if I release it from my hand, I'm not gonna, because I don't want to bruise this apple. I'm gonna eat it later. It falls. Newton's law of gravity, right? It falls. Now it has kinetic energy. So we took the potential energy and we converted it to kinetic energy. If I eat this apple, my body will convert the carbohydrates in this apple into a different form of carbohydrate, right? A different form, and that's a chemical energy. that will allow my body to move. So then the chemical energy becomes kinetic energy as well, and it will allow my brain to think. So there's chemical electrical energy that allows me to speak, vibrate the waves in the airs, and another type of kinetic energy. Oh, uh, interesting. Yeah. So the Emerald Tablet is itself very short, but the interpretations that are placed on that, there are lots and lots of works on hermetics. So, in fact, there's the Corpus Hermeticum, which includes the Emerald Tablet and lots of other writings. And there's a lot of stuff attributed to Hermes Trismegistus that we know came later, but it doesn't mean it's any less important, wise, or pointing to truth. Um, but it's definitely cool stuff. Oh, the Hermetica. Yeah. So the Hermetica, the Corpus Hermetica. Yeah. Which is the body, the hermetic body of work, which is it is that that is, yes, indeed, a lengthy bit of writing, but there's so much in there. There's so much that everything, um all of Western spirituality is built on top of. I remember I was reading the Corpus Hermeticum one time before a seminar that I was attending, reading it, and somebody came up to me. He's like, "Yeah, what are you reading there?" I was like, "Oh, it's the Corpus Hermetica," and he's like, "I don't know what it is." He goes, "Well," I explained it as well. It's a set of um, spiritual writings that kind of everything in Western religion from Christianity and whatever is based on. He said, "Well, Christianity is based on the teachings of Jesus Christ." And I said, "Well, yeah, yes. However, um, there are lots of things that there were lots of things built into Western religion that aren't necessarily taken directly from the attested speech of these religious leaders. There are a lot of principles that were spoken. The golden rule, right? So Jesus said, "Do unto others as you would have others do unto you." Buddha said that 500 years earlier. So it's, a principle of Huna, the Hawaiian form of spirituality, that not all truth is found in the same school, right? And that means a couple of things. It means one, no one body of knowledge has complete, utter access to all truths. This is where we run into the problems of fundamentalism, for example. And I don't just mean fundamental Christianity. There's all kinds of fundamentalism. There's scientific fundamentalism, right? Watched a physicist argue that there's no such thing as free will because there's no way to account for it in physics. Well, there's no way to account for me enjoying a symphony in physics either. I mean, you can describe the mechanics of you know music with physics, and you can describe the way that my brain processes sound, but you can't physics can't describe the experience of enjoying music that I might be having, right? It's the wrong tool, right? So the idea that, and that's a form of fundamentalism, that my tool is the only tool you need to describe all of reality. And reality is just not that simple, right? What's underneath reality, there are many different realities. Every one of us has a different reality, has multiple different realities that we live in. But reality as a whole, consensus reality, what lies underneath that is very simple because it's formless, but it contains the potential for everything. And I mean everything. That means everything means everything. It means without exclusion. It means, there is potential for a dragon to appear in my backyard. Is it likely? Probably not. I don't know. I don't know what the likelihood of that is. But it's probably close to zero. But there's potential for it. There's potential for anything that can happen, anything you can imagine, and even things that you are incapable of imagining coming into reality. And so I think like there's a lot of stuff that people it's very comforting to people for people to think they have the absolute complete explanation for everything that ever happens and everything there will be. But I think people are healthier when they have a more flexible belief system. Yeah. And not just science. I mean, obviously, religion has an issue with hubris, science has a issue with hubris. It seems to be part of the human condition. And I honestly think it's because people want to feel safer in the world. If I can predict with a great degree of accuracy everything that's going to happen around me, I can stay safe. That's the belief, right? That's the idea. And whether people consciously have that belief or it's in the back of their consciousness, right? If I'm wrong about something, oh my gosh, my whole world falls apart. No, it doesn't. If I think for a moment, this, this apple is basically red and it's got some yellow on it. But if I were to imagine really strongly that this apple was green, my world isn't going to fall apart. I might have a disagreement with somebody over it, and then people will disagree about colors all the time. It's funny because I paint, so I have an understanding of. I have a pretty good understanding of color, right? Color mixing and spectrums and color. What are complementaries and split complementaries and contrasts and color temperature and blah blah blah, all that technical stuff, right? But I'll look at something and say that's teal, and then somebody else will look at it and say, no, that's sea foam because whatever. And I'm like, well, it looks teal to me. um who's right? Who's the authority? Who gets to define what teal is? So our subjective experience is important. Our subjective experience is the reality that we're living through, and people try to poke holes in it, and that's fine. um but the problem comes when I try to, and I always talk about things like, I try to anyway. This is my viewpoint. This is my perspective. I'm in here talking, and you understand that. And if you have a different perspective, I do my best to respect that, right? Because everybody has a different perspective. Everybody has a different viewpoint. Everybody has different family, education, experience, culture. Everybody's read different books, watched different media. So are any two human beings on who have ever existed, do any of them have the same reality? Do any of them live in the same reality? And the answer to that is no. No. We all have that. I don't care how similar our lives are. Our biology is completely different. We are having through the lens of human experience, we are living in completely different realities. However, there is an underlying spiritual ground that we can meet at that is the same for everything underneath it all. Some would call this the field of grace or the state of grace or state of non-duality. Rumi, my favorite Rumi quote is, out beyond the ideas of right doing and wrongdoing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. I love Rumi. I love Rumi's poetry. He's writing love poems to divinity, basically. So he talks about his beloved and getting drunk in the arms of his beloved. He's not talking about a person. He's talking about experiencing divinity firsthand. And I don't 100% know that this is true, but somebody I know who lived in a Sufi community for some period of time told me that Rumi was a dancer. There are sects of there are different sects of Sufism, and some Sufis dance. If you've ever seen the people whirling in circles, and it's ecstatic dance. They're going into trance and they're spinning so that they can achieve a higher state of consciousness or a different state of consciousness that lets them experience merger in the field of infinity with their beloved, which is deity, God, Allah, whatever term you want to place on it. So somebody told me that Rumi was a dancer and he would dance himself into ecstatic trance and then recite the poems. He didn't actually write them down, and somebody else wrote his poems down. I don't know if that's 100% true. Someday I'll do some research on that, but I love his writing. Love Rumi's poems. Um, when I was married many a moon ago, um, uh, we had a Rumi poem read at our wedding. It was so beautiful. But he's talking about spiritual, he's talking very metaphorically, but the metaphors are fairly transparent. You can understand what he's talking about fairly easily, and just beautiful, beautiful ideas, concepts, beautiful imagery in his poems. Love his stuff. I got to dig out my book of Rumi poetry. Anyway, I have been talking for over an hour and a half. I'm gonna I'm going to end now and start my day. I've got clients to work with today and whatnot. So I will thank you all for joining me. I do love you all. I mean that. Um, I realize that may sound weird since I don't really know you, but um, I'll talk about spiritual love. Maybe I'll talk about that next time. Talk about what I mean by that. Oh, thank you very much. You're very welcome. Thank you for joining. I appreciate all of you tuning in, and your questions and your comments and all of those things are very, very valuable. I learned so much from you, and I learn, probably as much from you as you could learn from me in these. But hopefully, it provides, everybody's comments serve everybody on here. So, oh, you're very welcome. Thank you again for joining. So before my voice gives out, I'm gonna end things for the day. You have a great day as well, no matter where you are in the world, and I will talk to you again very soon. Maybe we'll talk about love next time. And I will do another. I do like talking. We brought up sexuality again today. I will do another talk on that. I've done talks on sexuality and spirit quite a bit, but I'll do another one at some point soon, so stay tuned if you want to be notified when I'm doing these. You can subscribe to the channel and then click on the bell, which will send you notifications when we go live. You can also watch these as recordings, and if you want to support this channel and the work that we're doing, you can join. There's membership through YouTube. It's a few bucks, and it supports the channel. And I haven't done a lot, but I will do some a lot more members only videos and stuff like that. And may at some point do, if I get enough people, I'll do some members only live talks as well. So anyway, take care all, and enjoy.